Hello and welcome. I'm Real Crowd CEO Adam Hooper, and this is the Real Estate Investing for Your Future podcast. Here we explore the latest in commercial real estate trends, insights, and investment strategies that passive investors can use to build real estate portfolios that last.
All opinions expressed by Adam, Tyler, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Real Crowd. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. To gain a better understanding of the risks associated with commercial real estate investing, please consult your advisors.
Welcome to a special bonus episode of this series we recorded with our friends from the Urban Land Institute at the Fall Meeting in Dallas. In today's conversation, we're joined by Charles Tu, the Daniel Mulvhill Endowed Chair of the Real Estate Department at the University of San Diego's Knauss School of Business. Charles joined us to help break down real estate waterfalls, Formas, and the common mistakes that investors make when reviewing them. To learn more about Charles and the University of San Diego's Knauss School of Business, be sure to check those show notes. With that, let's get to the conversation. Well, Charles, thank you so much for taking some time here at the Fall Meeting. Why don't you tell us about the work that you do at the University of San Diego and some of the classes that you teach?
I'm a professor and also the chair of the real estate department in the School of Business. I teach primarily finance-related classes. I'm also the director of our MS in Real Estate program.
Mm-hmm. And how have you seen, I'm just curious from the educator's perspective, we've gone through some pretty crazy times the last couple of years and heading into some uncertain times. Yeah. How has that changed any of your approach towards how you teach at the university, or what changes has that caused in the program, or has it?
I think higher education, one thing we try to focus on, particularly at the undergraduate level, is to help students build a foundation, a really solid foundation. So hopefully, with the knowledge and skills, they can apply in all kinds of different market conditions. So the approach or our focus is not to show them how to chase deals,
right?
But hopefully help them understand why the market is doing poorly or why people are making a lot of money in the real estate market. At the graduate level, we try to combine more practical aspects. About half of our classes are taught by adjuncts who are very experienced
from the business
professionals. Yeah. Many of them own their own real estate businesses, and they come to share their knowledge and experience with students. And we want students to see we want students to see what they learn in the classroom can quickly, easily be applied. But they need to understand how to do it. We can't teach them every single scenario in the market. In 2009, I teach financing, investment, and capital markets. Now, 2022, I still teach those two classes, but I think how students utilize the information in their business when they pursue their career, that's very different under the market conditions.
So the fundamentals, the approach and the fundamentals haven't really changed. It's how building those foundations allow you to apply it to whatever the market conditions are.
Yeah. And also, I think a key is to connect students with the real world, because the classroom hours is limited. But outside the classroom, the networking, additional learning, that's almost unlimited. Taking students to an event like Urban Land Institute, this fall meeting is one example. Students, they came to the conference and attend different sessions, talk to professionals, and that is a great way to learn. And then that's part of the value of education.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so you've been busy here. I think you did a full day session yesterday. You've done 2 more sessions. The one you were just at was talking about the basics of the pro forma or the waterfall structure. That was packed, right? There was a lot of people listening about the waterfall structure, and as we were talking on the way over, you look at 100 different deals, you're going to see 100 different waterfalls, right? So tell us a little bit, maybe high level, when you're looking at a waterfall structure, what are some of the key things that you're analyzing, and what are those foundations and fundamentals of a waterfall structure?
One thing interesting for me is to see, because I don't do any deals as an academic. I have access to a lot of different deal structures, and our board members sometimes will share information about their deals. So I look at them, and then for me, it's always try to take information from each deal to see how I can incorporate that into my teaching, and also try to understand the rationale behind each deal structure.
Right.
Because you have maybe majority of the deals, 85% of the deal structure is almost identical. But why would this company set up this particular provision, or that company have this particular requirement? That is the interesting part.
Yeah.
And understanding the rationale behind that, and also understanding the purpose of setting up waterfall structure. Because I always remind students, waterfall structure does not generate any cash flows. It's just to split the cash flow among partners.
Right.
Right? And why would you structure this way to increase, or why would company A focus on this aspects and company B try to focus on something different? That is the fascinating part.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer, because sometimes even with the information provided by companies, they don't necessarily share their trade secrets with me, but just by looking at the numbers, that's always fun for me.
Yeah, it's like most things in real estate, it depends.
Yeah,
right? It depends.
Exactly.
So do you see, in terms of what drives those factors and what those variables are, is that more opportunity and project driven, or is it more capital requirement driven? Or which I guess, which would you, I mean, obviously it goes both ways, right? But which do you think is more of a fundamental approach? Is it structuring the capital for the deal in the most appropriate fashion, and then finding the capital that agrees with that? Or is it structuring a deal for a specific capital partner and then pushing that into a deal? Which drives those decisions, I guess?
Even this question, it seems that it depends. Maybe the right answer, because waterfall structure can be applied in many types of deals, right?
Yeah.
Real estate syndication may use waterfall, and you see joint ventures, one operator and an institutional investor may create a waterfall structure, and real estate funds, they utilize waterfall structure. And I think each type of platform may have a different priority. And I've seen syndicators, because they have found a deal, now they need the capital quickly, otherwise they might lose the deal.
Right.
So it's more the ability to raise capital, that's critical. But then raising a fund, that is a little bit different. A lot of time this is a long process, a 12, 18-month process, so that getting all the money right away, not necessarily the priority.
Right.
So it seems that there are a lot of different factors that in the waterfall structure people will consider.
And then even within a fund, your early investors might have a side letter, so they're going to get a little different preferential terms than some of your later investors. So it can be very complex and very complicated. And I think all of that comes down to, again, your second panel, which is around building a pro forma and building a model. They can be as complex as the day is long, right? So I guess when you're either going about building a new model, or when you're reviewing a model, what are some of the steps or some of the key areas that people should be looking for when they're reviewing or building a model? I know that's everything.
I think the
you should look at everything.
First thing is to make sure there's no errors. And I think the panel I talk about common mistakes students make.
Right.
A lot of time, those mistakes don't change the result, don't change the financial outcome of your pro forma. Just the model is not as flexible, it's not as user-friendly. That's what I usually talk about in that short session, talking about mistakes students make. But it's also possible, I have seen models that just have major errors. That's the first thing. You have to avoid that.
That's a pretty low bar. But it happens, right? I mean, it definitely happens.
And then the next thing, assuming all the numbers are right, And I always remind my students just two things. One, whether the numbers make sense. Unfortunately, young professionals or students just started learning real estate don't necessarily have the ability to tell whether a number
they don't have the
makes
context
sense.
necessarily.
But after a while, if you see a going-in cap rate that's 20% or a deal that has the multiple that is extremely high, something either that's too good, really a deal that a once in a lifetime opportunity, or maybe there's some errors,
error in there,
or maybe the assumption may be a typo. So just make sure the numbers make sense. And then when you think about some of the deal structures, modeling, it's really key to make sure your financial model is consistent with the written legal documents. And that is always a potential issue. And we have seen a lot of deals, at least, for example, for waterfall structure, the partnership agreement drafted by attorneys, but then you have the financial models put together by analysts, and they don't talk to each other. It seems that they don't understand each other's terminology, or the concepts may be inconsistent. And you put together a document promoting a deal, showing the financial results turn out to be inconsistent with your legal document, and that becomes a major issue. And that is something I always try to remind my students. When you start your own business, you make sure you get the right help and then work with them to make sure everyone understands their responsibilities and everything is consistent.
The consistency amongst the documents is definitely something that we've certainly seen. And as you said, different parties, maybe they're speaking different terms, or they think the same terms mean a different thing, right? So making sure that all ties out between operating agreement, PPM, initial marketing materials. And as you mentioned on your panel, when everything's going great and everyone's making gobs and gobs of money, usually those things work out okay. But it's when we get into those markets where it becomes a little bit more challenging is when those very specifics, those are important and those matter, right? So maybe when you're looking at those common errors or mistakes that you might find in the models or in the structures, what are some of those common errors that are maybe less impactful, and what are some of the bigger ones to look out for that maybe do have a bigger impact on the performance?
I think simple things like when I talk to other people, actually one example was a few years ago, one of the students learned Waterfall in my class, and then when he talked to his supervisor at his internship and explained, Professor Tu described the Waterfall, we have this case study this way, because the structure was different from the company usually structure their deals. And then his supervisor said, that is too theoretical. It's just because that company doesn't structure a deal specific that way. That doesn't mean it's not common in business. So I look at that and feel that, a lot of times small things, whether a preferred return, unpaid preferred return will be compounded, or the unpaid preferred return will be carried forward. Or if you have surplus, would that be used to immediately return?
Cash flow from operations versus capital events.
And when you have a capital event, how that will be, the cash flow, how would that be distributed? Those are the things that can easily be identified in the legal document, but if it's not structured correctly, could have a major implication. Especially, I think, capital event, that is something definitely important when you look at a lot of the deal structures that either the refinancing or recapitalization, and the implications need to be considered.
And then given your access and position to be able to see so many different models and different structures, again, kind of it gets back to it depends, right? But are there generally some parameters that you see are more standard than others? I mean, I think, again, on our marketplace, we've seen a little bit of everything, right? Generally, simpler the better in most investors' eyes, right? A simple promote over a preferred return is kind of like that's the easiest it's going to get if, once you're past the pari passu level. And then we've seen waterfalls that are 3, 4, 5 tiers deep, right? So I guess in your exposure and practice, do you see common parameters? Do you see kind of standard structures coming through there? Or like, what do you tell your students when they're thinking about how do I come up with a structure out of the air?
Yeah.
What's your guidance there?
I definitely agree with you, because when you deal with unsophisticated investors who are relatively new to real estate, you want to keep the structure simple, because otherwise they may be wondering, are you trying to hide something, right? You're trying to take advantage of them. So making it simple and easy to explain, because I think investors, they would love to understand the waterfall model, even though it's not easy. But with a simple model, without too many different tiers of IRR look back, that will make it easier. And I think that is usually my recommendation to students. Hey, think about a simple structure that gives yourself a reasonable compensation, give yourself reasonable incentive to put together a good deal, but also allows you to attract capital and people are happy. And then initially, your contribution may need to be higher than 10, 15%, because when you don't have a track record, your investors want to see you have some skin in the game.
Right. Yeah.
But once you build your portfolio, you have a track record, you have your customer base, then you can change your parameters. Don't try to make
get too fancy out of the gate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's a marathon, right? Building your career and starting from a small single deal syndicator and hopefully graduate to a fund manager. Those are the type of things you have to think the long run. And that's usually my recommendation to students.
Yeah. And what are some of the factors that might cause someone to create a more complex structure?
I'm thinking maybe if you have, just thinking sometimes if the outcome is so uncertain, right? Just breaking that 8% preferred return barrier. But would that be, if the 8% will be the minimum, but you have that possibility to get to 25, 30%, but if you, right after 8% preferred return, you give yourself a huge promote, that may look that great from the investors, your partner's perspective. But you also want to set up the compensation structure in a way that if your project does perform extremely well, you give yourself the reasonable compensation. So maybe that the multiple tiers make sense, because when you go from 8 to 12 to 15 to 18 to 25, that gives you a good reason to convince
to try to outperform.
That your partners that you deserve that additional promote. And it seems that potentially could also show that you have that confidence in your deal, that they see, oh, yeah, you actually set up a hurdle that's 25%. That seems to be a great potential. And I think sometimes it's just psychological.
And now maybe wrap this up with this: of we're recording here in fall of 2022.
Yeah.
You just mentioned uncertain outcomes. I think we're heading into maybe some uncertain times. Do you have any? We can crystal ball a little bit here, but any indications or kind of guesses as to where structures may change, given that we're heading into some uncertain times?
That is something I will leave to experts like you, Adam, because I think you deal with
I ask the questions here. I ask the questions.
Actually, this is something I've been talking to some of my associates when I talk to professionals. Because I'm in real estate education, I always look at this. Doesn't matter what the market conditions are, there's always the opportunity to learn and then try to improve. So I don't have an answer to that question directly, but I'm looking at this. The market is that definitely the interesting thing I feel is that waterfall structure that is the right way to provide the incentive and compensation to real estate professionals, developers, and operators, because you don't get a flat fee or flat compensation. Your compensation depends on the performance. So now in this market, I think it becomes even more important to show your potential partners that you're willing to take chances on yourself. You're betting on yourself instead of asking them to pay you a very high fee.
Right.
Because when the market goes down, you want to show that you are willing to share the risk with them, or even more. That is a way to encourage and I think convince your potential investors to join your deal. I think the waterfall structure allows that alignment of interest pretty well.
Perfect. Well, Charles, that's a great place to end it. Appreciate you spending your time here at the fall meeting with us. So why don't you let the listeners know how they can learn more about what you're up to with the University of San Diego?
Great. So at University of San Diego, in our Knauss School of Business, our real estate program, you can find our information at usdrealestate.com.
Perfect.
So it's one word, usdrealestate.com, and information about our academic programs, our center, our events, our services to students can all be found on that website.
Thank you, Charles. Remember, you can learn more about Charles and the University of San Diego's Knauss School of Business by checking the show notes. Thank you again to Urban Land Institute for helping us share highlights from the fall meeting with all of our listeners. To learn more about the Urban Land Institute, head to uli.org. With that, we'll catch you in the next one.